friends, welcome back again to another episode of Tactical Enlightenment. Our YouTube channel is dedicated to all things Bannerlord related, but especially advanced battlefield command and tactics. And don't worry, I'm over caffeinated, but I'm not going to speak so fast you can't understand me. The rest of this episode will be spoken at a nice audible rate where you guys can understand. We are going to dive into archers in this episode. This is going to be the first of probably 3 guides, if I had to guess. I kind of just shoot from the hip here. I know some guys are more formal and they'll have an outline for everything. I'm hoping these episodes are in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 minutes long, and they are comprehensive in their information about archers. We're not going to cover like every single bow in the game and every single nook and cranny, but this is going to give you a lot of information necessary to help you do better at Bannerlord. And some of the tests I've done recently really kind of opened my eyes. So very quickly, at the beginning here, I want to talk about the archer strengths themselves, right? Everybody knows that archers are very powerful in Bannerlord, but as you get up the tiers, working your way from tier 3, tier 4, and tier 5, and there are some tier 2 archers for the most part, but they are absolute trash. The Imperial Archer, for example. But as you work your way up, there are subtle changes that really start to stand out in tests. Now, I'll talk about the tests a little bit, but first I want to talk about something that I think is very important, and it may not be as important to you depending on the stage of your campaign, but that's ammunition. Right? You'd be surprised to know that archers vary widely in how much ammunition they have. This guy, for example, the tier 3 Sturgian archer has 2 quivers of arrows, right? And they both have 20, so he has 40 arrows. Now, if you scroll along the way here, I've looked at some other archers. The tier 3 Khazate only has 1 quiver, right? So for some reason, this guy must not weightlift enough or something. He's got only 1 bag of arrows, and they may do more damage, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But over the course of a long battle, this is a major detriment, right? This guy has 24 arrows, and he's shooting at somebody who has 40. Anybody who's played Bannerlord a significant amount knows you will have ranged battles against your opponent in Bannerlord, and this is a major problem, not having enough ammo, right? You will run out of ammo, and suddenly you got this guy with this fucking paltry little sword, and notice no shield. This lazy fuck here, evidently his brass plate on his chest or whatever is too heavy for him to either carry a shield or another quiver. All jokes aside, so this is important, right? You get to the Archery. The Archery archer at tier 3 actually has the most ammunition of any of them. Well, let me take that back. The Battanian line might have a comparable amount. No, they have less too. So isn't that interesting? Here's the tier 3 Battanian archer, right? These guys are famed archers. This is their noble line, and he only has 2 quivers of arrows. So 40, and then you get to this Archery light archer, and he has 54. That's a lot more, right? That's 14 more arrows. And granted, they're going to do less damage because they're lower weapon tier. I don't know if you guys caught that part, right? These are actually, they're the same weapon tier as well. He might have a different bow. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds on this kind of stuff because I ran some tests. The tests are not definitive. I'll talk about that in a second. Ultimately, archers are all unique, right? Pretty much every unit in the game has a little different armor. One unit might have much stronger head armor and different chest armor. It's a nice variability within Bannerlord that sort of removes some of the benefits of things like some guys have 2 quivers. But in my opinion, when we're talking tier 3 archers, at least at the beginning of this episode, the archers that have 2 quivers are superior. Now, the ones that don't are the Imperials, right? The Imperial trained archer does not have 2. Again, this lazy fuck, I guess he's too hot wearing his big quilted robe or whatever he's got here. He's too hot to carry an additional quiver. And again, he has a one-handed weapon. If it was a Battanian Fiend champ, you could understand because he's got like a big heavy sword, but this guy's got a little dinky sword and a little pathetic quiver with only 20 arrows. That means this fuck runs out of arrows very early on. And incidentally, and I will get to the tests at a later stage in this episode, this guy here is the worst archer all around when it comes to tier 3. He has, they vary in athletics. Athletics, of course, is important if you're trying to kite. That means they move faster. They vary between 70 and 80. Some of the guys have 80. None of them have like 90 or 100 or something like that. The athletics are pretty similar. In fact, all of the tier 5 archers, and I went and looked, they all have exactly 130 in athletics, so you get a very similar speed. Mind you, the armors, the heavier armors, those guys will run a little slower. But this guy has the least amount of arrows. In the tests, which I'll talk about in a second, it's a little bit of a spoiler. He does the least amount of damage in the tests I ran repeatedly. In fact, he basically finished dead last, and he has the worst athletics. So this guy here, if you're playing Imperials, you want to quickly start upgrading this guy. Leave him in your garrisons. Don't bring this guy into the battlefield. There are simply some units that are inferior in Bannerlord, and we've identified this fuck here. So moving on, right? The Imperials have 1 quiver. The Khazate Hunter also only has 1 quiver. And then, of course, the crossbow also have 1 quiver, right? Your Valandian crossbow, just your basic tier 3 crossbow. Now, when we get to the tests, and I'll talk about that more in a second, these guys were amazing. These guys were off the charts, basically the best tier 3 archer you can have in the tests I ran, which surprised me. It surprised me so much I ran the test 4 times. And you can probably try it at home. You will probably find the same results. I'll talk a little bit more about the tests in a second, but that's an important consideration. Ammunition. Now, once you get to tier 4, with the exception of the crossbow, right, because they have a shield and sword, which is a whole nother subject. It's a highly unique archer. Very few archers in Bannerlord, with the exception of some bandits and minor clans, have a sword and a shield, right? Your other one, of course, is your Imperial Sergeant crossbow and the Imperial crossbow. These are both Imperial units. I'll also talk extensively about them because they also kicked fucking ass in the tests. But all your other archers, once they get to tier 4, they typically have 2 quivers, right? So you have much more ammunition, your Sturgian archer, your Archery archer, etc. Now they get to a stage where they consistently have 2 quivers, and they vary between 20 and 27 arrows. So at least they have 2 quivers. Once you get to tier 4, they have plenty of ammunition, and of course all of the tier 5, again with the exception of the Valandian crossbowmen, have 2 tiers. Now, if you think about that, of course, the Valandian crossbowmen have a lot of versatility. They can square and stuff like that, but there's a huge advantage to crossbow, and they seem to have incredible front-loaded damage. In other words, if an enemy comes over a hill and there's a whole bunch of locked and loaded crossbowmen, it's absolute fucking destruction for whatever gets in the path of all of those raining bolts. And this can be, you can just simply look at it from the perspective of the bolt damage themselves. The highest bolt damage is, a legendary heavy bolt or something like that. We have one in our inventory here. It's 8 for damage, right? So this is 1 higher than legendary piercing. Basically, the bolts do higher damage. And there's other factors at play as well. There's piercing, and how these things affect armor obviously is a factor as well. But ultimately, the bolts and the crossbowmen, these guys do massive front-loaded damage, and that can be very important. And again, we'll talk about that more in a second. I'll slip this little sneak trailer in, though, 20 minutes or 15 minutes here before I talk all about the tests. The Valandian crossbowmen, the hardened crossbowmen especially, they're tier 3 and tier 4, absolutely ripped apart horse archers like no other unit on the battlefield. It was amazing. I ran the tests over and over again, and again I'll get deeper into the weeds on that in a second, and they were by far better than the Battanian hero, and even the Valandian sharpshooter was comparable or even a little better than the Battanian Fiends. Not the Fiend Champions, of course, but the Battanian Fiends. They just, for whatever reason, they destroyed horse archers. So the gist of that, and I want to put this in capital letters on the screen, if you are playing Battania or the Imperials, or even Sturgia, and you are having a hard time with horse archers, make yourself a little journey. Go pick up 100, 150 levy crossbow from Valandia, right? Get them however you need to, and then start putting them in castles all along your frontier for use, because they will be devastating against horse archers. This is something I can confidently say as of version 1.2.8 or whatever the fuck. It's probably the same through all the versions of people watching this episode. All right, so let's get to the aforementioned tests. We're also, of course, going to have some tactics in this episode. I'm going to have 4 different episodes, or 3 different episodes at least, and we will definitely cover tactics on an increasingly more difficult basis, right? I basically have a series of custom battles planned where I'm going to show you increasingly more difficult tactics and show you empirically why those tactics are important with your archers. Some of the tactics you guys can perform, again, from easier to much more difficult. And the most difficult will probably be kill box type tactics, and that more than likely will be episode 3. So stay tuned. So the tests, let's talk about the tests. So the tier 3 units, this is the best way for me to do it. I just got a little sheet here. This is how state of the art I am. I'm old school. I broke out a pen and paper and I just wrote this shit down. Now what I did, and I can just give you a summary before I just blaze into it all. I won't give you every single detail, but essentially I did custom battles and I did 300 archers against 100 tier 5 and tier 6 horse archers. I know that seems strange, but the reason I did that is when I tried various tests against infantry, against other units, essentially the AI performed so badly that this ended up being the best way for me to do this, right? The AI bumbled. Like when I would do archer versus archer, I would stand there and be shooting the archers, and these fucking archers that we were shooting would rush up to us until they're 80 yards away, getting murdered, mass murdered before they would open fire. So unfortunately, some of the tests I really wanted to perform for equality didn't really work. Ultimately, I decided on horse archers, and here's why. Horse archers are very hard to shoot. They circle, they move, they've got armor. I figured it was the most logical test, a very difficult test for archers. So I pitted 150, or I started with 100, tier 4 and tier 5 horse archers, because 8 horse archers. I think actually, I apologize. It was tier 5 and tier 6. It doesn't really matter. Tier 5 and tier 6 against tier 3 archers. And what I did is I gave each different kingdom 300. So 300 Sturgian archers, 300 Imperial trained archers, etc. And then I logged the data. Now, anytime there were highly unusual results, I ran the test 3-4 times, right? And in some cases, the first example, they did pretty well. The next time they got slaughtered. And so I ran the test a few more times to try to eliminate essentially the outliers to the statistical results. Now, this is not on a level of like strat gaming. If you guys want to get deep into the weeds on stuff like this, I heartily recommend his channel, right? This guy is like obsessed with Bannerlord and the statistical side of the game far more than I'm interested in getting into. But so many people have desired this. I'll at least try to be brief. I tend to be long-winded. I'll talk briefly here about how the different tiers did in this challenge. So tier 3, Valandia was the best, and I wrote insane on my results. The Valandian tier 3 crossbow, these guys have no shields. They absolutely decimated the horse archers. It was astonishing. Second place was Britannia. Of course, the Britannia archers are well-founded, strong units. These were the Britannian highborn warriors, I believe, are the tier 3. The Khazate archers actually got third. Now, ironically, they had less ammo, right? We talked about that a second ago. So it's kind of front-loaded. They run out of ammo, but out of all the different tests, out of the 6 kingdoms, they got third place. The Aserai light archer got fourth. But again, I want to mention that they have the most ammunition of all those archers. So you can't really look at just the kill rate, right? There's all kinds of things. There's survivability, there's endurance, etc. Fifth place went to Sturgia. And then, as I mentioned before, dead fucking last in all the tests. Every time I ran it was the Imperial trained archer. So don't carry those guys around. Stick them in garrisons. Hopefully the auto resolve works better for those guys, or better yet, upgrade them, because once your Imperial archers start to upgrade, they start to move up the tier, so to speak, up the scale. So tier 4, we'll move on to that. The Valandian hardened crossbow, you won't be shocked, also scored the best in the second round, right? We've got a theme here. They were the best out of the tier 3. They were the best out of the tier 4. I mentioned that earlier. They absolutely decimated the horse archers. So the second place out of the tier 4 units was Khazate. And you might be kind of surprised by that, but for whatever reason, I ran the test multiple times. The Khazate, I think it's actually just called a Khazate archer. In fact, here, let me just do some of this shit. I can multitask. the Crecy Archer. These guys were second out of the tier 4 units. Now again, they have two quivers, so these guys are noticeably better than the Hunter. The Hunter scored third in the first test, but only has the one quiver. As soon as you start upgrading these guys, not only do they have better results here, but they also have two quivers. So third place went to the crossbow, right? The Imperials actually start to have two units here. I ran tests for both, and the Imperial crossbow were third on the list. They performed quite well. Fourth place was the Archery Archer. They're kind of middling. Again, they finished fourth in the first test as well, so you're sensing a theme here. In fact, Sturgia also finished fifth again in the second test. And then lastly were your Imperial veteran archers. So this is two tests in a row where the Imperial archer finished last against horse archers. Long story short, if you're playing Southern Empire, Western Empire, even Northern Empire, and you're recruiting archers and upgrading, and it gets to that stage where and this is a ding, 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 this is an important moment, right, for you guys that are in this situation. If you're considering upgrading them to either Palatine, that archer line, right, the veteran archer line, or the crossbow line, if you're fighting horse archers, definitely go the crossbow line. Not only do they have more versatility, but they absolutely smoke horse archers. I will put a little tiny caveat onto the back of it here. They will run out of ammo earlier, right? They only have one quiver. Your crossbow guys never, as far as I know, there's no crossbow in the whole game that have multiple, whatever you want to call them, fucking bags of bolts, right? All of these guys have one, even though this dipshit obviously doesn't have a shield. Another one of these lazy fucks with a stupid helmet. Too fucking lazy, I guess, to carry. Not only that, he doesn't even have 20 bolts in his bag, but these guys did much better than the tier 4 Imperial Archer, right? So if you have to choose between that guy or this guy right here at this branch, you want to choose this guy. Again, the Imperial Sergeant Crossbow, and we'll get to them in a second. I'll just sneak it ahead here. They did better than the Palatine Guards, okay? So the guys who are wondering about these archer lines, I'm not saying all of your units should be crossbow, but I would probably, if I was playing Imperials today, I would probably upgrade 70 or 80% of my archers onto this line. More versatility, more killing power. The reason I would want these archers is long battles. In fact, if you know you have a really long battle coming up, I would choose this line or more of these guys. If you're in a siege, I would choose more of these guys. In particular, of course, a siege defense, because these guys don't run out of ammo. Suddenly, the fact that they have one little dinky quiver doesn't mean a fucking thing. In fact, this guy's added a little bodkin arrow bag. It doesn't mean a fucking thing because all archers and all crossbow in a siege defense have unlimited ammo. Right, so hopefully, and I'm going to write some notes kind of in big bold letters on the screen as I run this episode. I apologize, I don't have the state-of-the-art editing that some of these other creators have, but we got more fucking swearing on this channel. I speak faster probably, and hopefully we're providing some tiny level of entertainment with these guides. All right, so again, I think that's a critical point. Generally, you're going to want to veer towards this way, especially if you're facing horse archers. All right, tier 5. Almost every single person knows that once you start getting high-level Battanian archers, you start dominating, right? Even though these guys got the most stupid fucking helmet, it looks like a fucking jar of candy landed on his head and he couldn't get it off, so he just cut a little patch to see out of. These guys ripped it up, right? In the tests, they were basically neck and neck. I couldn't really determine who was better between them or the Valandian sharpshooters. It was very close. They were the only ones that won the challenges that I ran. It was 250 tier 5 and tier 6 Crecy against 200 or 300 of these guys. So even though they didn't have any tier 6, they still more than held their own. These guys and the Valandian crossbowmen, and this is no surprise. Anybody who's ever collected an army and sort of seen it with the eye test knows that these guys fucking kick ass. Not to mention they pull out their two-handed sword and they fuck people up. These are superior units of Valandian crossbowmen. I've done a whole couple of episodes on how incredibly powerful they are. In particular, of course, the sharpshooters. Once they get that big Pavis shield, they are just lethal, and they're highly versatile. All right, so top 2, Fians and Valandian sharpshooters. Next was the Sergeant Crossbow. These guys did remarkably well. There's even one test that I threw out where I don't know exactly what happened if the horse archers got kind of stuck on each other. They completely destroyed the horse archers in a stunning fashion. It was just like off the charts success. Plowed right through them. It was a fucking massacre. And I tried to make the tests as uniform as possible, but anybody who's done the custom battle knows it drops you into sort of relatively random locations, right? It doesn't put you in exactly the same spot every single time. Fourth place went to the Archery Master Archers, and I actually kind of expected them to do better. My own experience between the custom battles and having them in my armies is that these guys are nasty. I hate fucking facing these guys on the battlefield, and I love having 30, 40, 50 of these guys in my army. These guys are, it came out as middle of the pack in the tests, but I think they're above average. Next were the Palatine Guards, right? So they bumped up a little tiny bit from, I hope I'm saying that right, the Imperial Palatine Guards. These were next in line, but again, next we're talking like, again, towards the back here, and then Sturgia, Kazate and then Sturgia. So an interesting thing happened. Kazate was fairly high early on in the tests. They were third place out of the tier 3, and they were second, basically tied for second in the tier 4s, but they dropped all the way to 6th for the tier 5. So for whatever reason, and I ran the test over and over again, I've always had a fairly high opinion of Kazate marksmen, but the test basically said that these guys are not very good. Take all of these tests with a grain of salt. Again, none of this is empirical, just due to the nature of custom battles. Horse archers, sometimes they get jammed up on each other in the random nature of shit, and they die in larger waves. But they scored badly repeatedly. Last but not least, actually last and least, and most people who've played with them also know that the Sturgeon veteran archers suck. That's just, there's no other way to put it. I can't even click the right one. It's like my brain doesn't actually want to show you these fucking dipshits. They just did not perform well in any of the tests, right? And that's appropriate, because almost everybody would tell you that their infantry is amongst the very best in the game, right? These guys with their goatee trying to look like badass. And the reason they have that goatee is because they're not good at combat, and so they're trying every single advantage they can. Like that guy who's got those shoes that make him 4 inches taller. These guys are doing everything they can to make up for the fact that they're a very mediocre archer. All right, so that covers sort of how I feel about the units. Of course, all of the tier 5 and tier 6 archers are awesome. I've done extensive testing in Bannerlord. And infantry is very powerful if it's used correctly, but the bottom line is that archers are overpowered in Bannerlord. I'm in the process of an archer-only tactics series where we run around the battlefields of Calradia with only archers. And I can tell you at this stage I've made several episodes, and the results are shocking. I'm absolutely destroying everything in my path. Armies twice our size, 3 times our size, get the fuck out of our way, crushing everything in sight. The bottom line is, in my personal opinion, they need to be nerfed down a little bit. Not as severe as the realistic battle mod nerfs them down, but I just think archers at this stage are too powerful. Well, what does that tell you if you're playing Bannerlord at the time of this recording? You should have plenty of archers in your army. In fact, unless you're doing it for fun, and you don't want to have archers, I would say the minimum anybody should have in their army is 30% archers. I don't think 50% is too much. If half of your army is archers, I think you're going to have more success than if 20% is archers. The exception, of course, is Kazate. If you've got 50% horse archers, well, it's kind of the same thing, right? You got mounted archers, which are, they can be better. Incidentally, the tests I've run is that generally archers of the same tier, the archers actually destroy the horse archers, which seems strange. But that's just what my results have shown. Horse archers are definitely better against like infantry, mounted cavalry. They're more versatile, and so naturally the foot archers tend to do. I think they shoot a little faster. They're obviously more accurate because they're standing still, and they tend to do a little bit better against mounted archers. All right, so that sort of wraps up what I feel about the individual units. Ultimately, again, in summary, the Fiends, the Valandian Champions, and the Sergeant Crossbow from the Tier 3 or Tier 5 line, those are the units you should be stockpiling. It doesn't mean that the other archers aren't good. They're just a little below average, right? You're putting unleaded fuel into a supercar if you're running around with the other archers. From Tier 4, no question, the Valandian Hardened Crossbow is the one you want, right? Not only are they versatile, but they fucking did mass murder. Of course, the exception is long battles, which is why you want to have a diverse army. I hear all the time guys on Facebook or whatever saying, well, the best army is X, only this, 150 Consguards, that's the best army. I don't think so, folks. I think versatility is much more important over the course of all the different battles you're going to face in Bannerlord than having, just, of course, the Consguards are great, but there are situations where they're not that good, right? They're just not as good. If you've got infantry and shield walls, you use tactics, you can butcher armies full of horse archers, as our channel has shown. And finally, it's not that important, but the tier 3, again, make sure you have some of those Valandian units. If you're nearby, if you're Britannia, if you're Archery, if you're not going over and commandeering some tier 3 crossbow, I think you're playing the game wrong, right? These guys are very powerful. At tier 3, they're already fucking people up. They don't have a shield, right? So these guys aren't like gods of the battlefield, but they fuck up horse archers, and with very quick work, they're going to be tier 4, tier 5 Valandian units, highly versatile, destructive, front-loaded damage, right? You want those Valandian archers in your army. Of course, next is Battanian. Anybody also who's playing a campaign, unless you're just trying to play a suboptimal campaign, you ought to be trying to obtain Battanian archer lines, right? The Battanian Fiend Champ, in my opinion, is the strongest unit in the game. Maybe some people would say the Consguards. I've had Battanian Fiends just rip apart Consguards, but obviously you want some Battanian Fiend lines. And avoid at all costs, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but that fucking worthless Imperial trained archer, leave those guys in your garrisons. All right, let's move on to the tactics phase of this episode. All right, so let's do some tactics. Now, I look down at my little watch here. I'm old school using a watch, and I noticed that my episode is already going a little bit longer than I wanted. So what I'm going to do here is essentially have a series of custom battles, and I'm going to give the enemy a slight advantage to begin with, and then a larger advantage as we kind of develop more and more tactics. Now, what I've also done is given the enemy more infantry. We're looking for a neutral map, a relatively flat map, and this very first battle, we're going to essentially let the AI crash this Tesla into the fucking building, right? We're going to let this dipshit computer AI try to see what they can do tactically with this army. I'm going to speed it up a little bit more. In fact, I'm actually voicing over my initial narration because I don't want this to be an hour-long episode. I do want to show you these various things, including this basic thing. Please don't use the AI. I know most of the guys on the channel are already aware of that, but you can see the colossal goat fuck this turned out to be. The allied forces controlling this Archery army ran up into the hills. They're super congested. They seem to wait for the enemy vanguard to rush them. There were archers mixed in with their infantry, and it was generally a very bad result. Now, I sped this up even more, and as you can see, we're outnumbered, but they got completely butchered here. Now, in this second run, I'm basically going to reload this and show you what you should do. All right, so now we'll fight the exact same battle, and we're going to use very basic tactics. Like I said, what we're going to do in this episode is very slowly increase the tactical difficulty. I recognize for some of you experts out there that are already 3,000 hours and 5,000 hours playing, you don't need this, but I'm trying to make these episodes fairly helpful to somewhat newer players, right? These are not going to help brand new players. It's going to be too complex for them, but I'm trying to help a broader audience with these episodes. I get these requests all the time, and I'm trying to help fellas. So what I'm essentially doing here is very basic. I've got an infantry line and a cav line. The first is infantry and the second is cavalry in a shield wall. Those guys are essentially just protecting our archers, right? This is standard military tactics. And what we have is our archers uphill. You see they're on this nice hill overlooking the battlefield. And again, to remind you, this is the exact same setup, the exact same army and troops in the last battle where the allied forces got absolutely worked. You can see my camel down there is twerking as I move the camera around here. So our archers are uphill. That means they're firing further. That means they're doing more damage. I know that seems strange, but arrows that go downhill do more damage, right? There's a physics model to Bannerlord. So it's the exact same battle where we're outnumbered by 10%. In theory, we should lose this battle, but we're using our range advantage, and more importantly, we're going to use the rest of our units as you really should, right? And this is very basic, but the enemy infantry line is coming in. So what we're going to do here is we're going to charge with our cavalry. Now we're going to charge with the infantry, right? Their cavalry line just broke through our infantry. In fact, horses are flying all over the place. I love that shit. And it looks very messy. You're like, well, you suck, man. Your tactics are awful. The enemy just devoured your line. It looks bad now, but trust me, it's going to get better. I have faith that this is going to get better. In fact, what we're going to do here is we can back up our archers a little bit. This is kiting. It's just one move, right? We're just simply going to move these guys a little tiny bit up this hill, right? We're going to move them out of the maelstrom. There's a whole bunch of infantry and cavalry having a gigantic fucking rugby match down there. Let's get our little dainty archers up the hill here a little higher. It doesn't mean they're free of damage, right? They're still being attacked by heavy cavalry, but now these guys can be, I'll speed this up, these guys can start unleashing hell to kill all this cavalry. They're shooting the infantry that's close to them, so they're doing massive damage because they're shooting this infantry up close. The allied forces, of course, are still attacking in there, the infantry and cavalry, because unlike that first battle, we attacked in concert. Now our archers are raining down death on the enemy archers that are moving in, and despite the fact in this battle that we were outnumbered by 10%, 40 troops, with these very basic tactics, concentration of forces, using this elevation, we have fucked up this Imperial force. It looks like they're charging, actually. That's suicide. They have no chance of winning that way. Actually, they might just be routing off the battlefield. We can charge as well. All charge F1, F3 is perfectly fine at this stage, and you can see from the death spam that this battle is over. So the AI, if you put this under control, you know, if you said sergeants take control, you lose. You do these basic tactics and you crush them. Now we're going to do the exact same thing here, right? We're just going to add a tactical layer. All I'm going to do here is a little bit of flanking, right? We're going to pick out some landscape here where we can do some flanking. So we're going to have a couple more divisions, and I know this is daunting to a newer player. Trust me, though, once you start setting this up, once you start getting used to it, it'll get easier. I'm going to have the 4th and 5th will be archers. The 2nd's going to be cavalry, right? We can actually have 2 cavalry divisions, the 2nd and the 3rd. And we're just going to have 1 infantry line. We don't need to have 2. We don't need to get overly complicated. Again, I'm going to increase difficulty for you fellas slowly here. Of course, I want to mention, slide it in. You always want your archers in spread formation, maybe line formation every once in a while, but I would prefer spread. Now, I'm putting the cavalry kind of at an angle there to prevent their cavalry from pounding our archers at full speed. And what we're going to do is flank on the 3rd and 5th, flank on our right side with the 3rd and 5th. Now, I can already hear guys saying, well, the shields are on that side. You should have them on the other side. I've got a hill here, which I think is superior tactically to shooting on the other side. And I can explain that real quickly. The reason they suggest that is that the enemy forces coming in, they're all right-handed, right? So they have a sword in their right hand and a shield in their left hand, which means to swing their weapon, they are obviously more exposed from archers on the other side. And so in other words, the opposite direction that I'm positioning these troops. Still, I think the elevational advantage here is going to be worth more than that in this battle. Now, some of these I'll speed up, but these early ones here, I don't want to overwhelm guys. I recognize that there are some fairly new players that have found the channel. Your veteran player probably doesn't need this episode, right? Your highly experienced player, maybe you'll wait for episode 2 or 3 where we start doing kill box, where we start doing decline slope ridge strategy, where we start doing the more complex tactics. This is, I don't want to say beginner, this is intermediate when you're flanking and having 5 or 6 divisions, but this is a tactic I think most fairly new players can adopt. So their infantry line is coming in. It's about to clash with ours. I'm not actually going to go crazy and just start charging all these divisions. I just want those guys holding that line there. They're in a shield wall, and that's so our archers can work. These guys on the flank are raping the enemy cavalry because they're hitting our cav lines and getting slowed down. This is a classic thing I do. It's shield and shock. You put heavy cavalry in a shield wall right in front of your archers. The enemy cavalry will run and rush those archers. They get held up and shot to pieces. And in fact, speeding these battles up with the RTS mod, this battle's already over, right? The enemy does have archers, and they're going to skirmish with us for a little bit, but we not only have more archers than them, but our infantry did really well. It's now moving in for the kill. The cavalry's fucking up their archer lines, and this battle's over. Now, I want to make a critical point. The reason that we still have infantry and cavalry is that our lines held a shield wall. Our infantry was basically playing defense while our archers raped everything on the battlefield, right? This is a resounding success. This is the same battle setup where the enemy lost when we turned it over to the sergeant. Hopefully that kind of evidence is enough to prove to people you do not want to be doing F1, F3, or especially F1, F6. Do not let your Tesla crash you into a wall and kill your girlfriend. Our guys are all celebrating here, and this battle is over. All right, so we jump right back into the custom battle menu, and I've saved you a little bit of time here. What we're going to do here is do only crossbow, right? We're going to have the tier 4 and tier 5 crossbow. And for the Empire here, what I've done is set up all of their tier 4, 5, and we'll give them the elite cataphracts, which are tier 6, right? So not only are we outnumbered, but we're going to go against heavy cavalry. Again, this is, let's see, whoops, I got horse archers in here. This is something that I've discovered in cavalry tests. Heavy cavalry in the game is absolute garbage. Now, first, I'm going to let the AI just do their thing, and I still think that they have a good chance of success here. But then we will take over and we will enact what I think will be superior strategy to what they're going to do. Oh, oops! I don't have the Imperial Elite Cataphract in here. I just realized. That's okay. We will run this out. So these crossbowmen are moving forward. This is the AI. The sergeant is in control. Now this is one of those situations where these Valandian crossbow that I've mentioned before in this episode are so powerful, it doesn't matter. They just get charged like it's the Rohirrim. This heavy cav rips through there, and all the crossbow are killed. They're all wait, never mind. All the heavy cav is being decimated and destroyed. This is tier 4 and tier 5 heavy cav, and it's being absolutely gutted. Complete massacre in a custom battle menu with the sergeant control, right? So there's no advanced tactics here. In fact, their tactics are basically like an amoeba. It just looked like a big pile of dog shit out on the battlefield, and talk about decimating them, right? I mean, this is, again, it's one more example, 30-second example of how shitty heavy cav is in Bannerlord, and also how powerful your crossbow are, right? Your crossbow units are devastating. I know I've said that like 4 times in this episode. Now we will try, we will give the AI control and a little bit more troops, and we will give them a mixed army, right? We will see how these crossbow fare against a mixed army. And I've got a spoiler here. I'm pretty sure that these crossbow are still going to fucking butcher them, right? So again, sergeants take control. These 490 crossbowmen start roaring out in the battlefield against a very strong mixed army now of all tier 4 and tier 5. And right away, you can see things are not going to go well for the enemy. All of their horse archers, and I mentioned this before, crossbow absolutely eat horse archers for lunch. Every single horse archer is already dead or routing. A few guys here are fleeing for the hills. They got an absolute beat down, and now the infantry wants their try here, right? They're forming a shield wall. The AI does a pretty good job. In fact, it looks like it's lining it up of a big heavy cavalry charge with an infantry charge. They actually time it better than I do a lot of times. Their cav's a little bit late, but in they come. Heavy cav pour through and decimate our Valandian sharpshooters. All of our archers all of our crossbow are killed. Oh no, wait, the enemy is the one getting killed. It's not as lopsided as that first battle because the infantry's in there fucking them up. But this is with the garbage sergeant control on and virtually no tactics, right? Their crossbow is just in a big pile of shit on the battlefield. The heavy cav is sent packing, the infantry is annihilated, and now the Valandian crossbowmen go to work on the archers, and the enemy is fleeing. And you just mangle them, right? Have I convinced you yet to go get some crossbow? These guys are amazing. And that's with no tactics, right? So they had just over 40% of their troops left with no tactics at all, right? That's, again, with tier 4 and tier 5 cavalry, and they got completely just ripped apart. All right. Now let's use some actual tactics. Hopefully you guys can forgive me for waiting so long to get to the tactics with crossbow. I know some guys specifically want to see tactics with crossbow. Now I must say we've had multiple episodes with tactics on crossbow, so please don't get too upset. It's amazing how many times people ask me for such and such episode, and I've already created it like 3 times, right? You guys, please use that search function, that little magnifying glass, and then punch in a keyword or something like that. More than likely, I've covered what you want to know about. So what I'm doing here is effectively a ring defense with the 2nd Crossbow Division. You'd be surprised to think that you'd split your crossbow up like this, but these are the only units we have in this battle. Now, we don't need to do this. You just saw the sergeant crossbow, more accurately, the AI just rip apart the enemy here. So the same battle, this is hardly necessary. But assume that we were up against an extra 100 or 200 troops, and this was a battle you had to win. If you use these tactics, you could probably overcome dramatically difficult battles. So I've got the first and third crossbow. They're effectively off. One's off to the left and one's towards the center. These guys are going to play defensive roles fairly early on here. In the middle, I have the best crossbow. I didn't have time to say it there because I'm running this at maximum speed. These are the best crossbow in the middle with a little bit of protection. And then the crossbow at the back, I'm actually holding fire. I know that seems strange, but I don't want these guys to all run out of bolts. I want these guys to unleash their bolts when the enemy is closer, and so they're on hold fire. It's not like we need it, right? We just decimated. There go their horse archers again. Up and away they go, all annihilated. They didn't score a single kill again. And now let's deal with the rest of their troops. What we're doing is we're unloading bolts with that first and third, and we're going to form those into squares. If that cav division charges, we will form them into a square, right? And I can do it in 2 different locations. Now the ring defense here is not a traditional ring defense. It's not going to stop the heavy cavalry. But what it does is it spreads out our archers, and it also creates a little bit of a slowdown for the enemy heavy cavalry, which is vital, right? That slows down their cavalry. The square slows them down. In fact, we're going to form them into a square and move them. That way their infantry is sort of chasing our crossbow. And as this cav comes in, it's going to get manifestly slowed down by the square and by the circle. In fact, they're kind of zerging towards the center there. That's going to cost them speed, and slow cavalry, I always say this, is dead cavalry. Now I was going to square this third division, but I don't need to, right? The enemy's not bothering it at all, so those guys can fire away. We will drag this square out of town with all these guys chasing them like they all owe money or something like that. A bunch of fucking guys who loaned them money and now they want their money back. The 5th Corps, notice at the back there, is completely untouched, right? Those guys that were holding fire, they're just raping everything in sight. The 4th Corps in the middle there is just raping everything in sight. Pretty much nothing is getting to them, and it's generally a massacre here, right? The infantry is starting to reach our 4th line here, but they are badly diminished at this stage. Of course, the enemy cavalry is devastated, and the only thing that's left is the enemy archers, right? They have a line of archers. Unfortunately, the enemy's not very good about advancing them. In a situation like that, they should be marching them up very quickly to help their guys, but they don't. Artificial imbecility, I mentioned that 1,000 times. Take advantage of it, and as you can see here, we're trending towards 60% of our troops left on the battlefield. The AI had 40% left. In fact, we're going to have more than 60, pushing 70% of our troops left on this battlefield. So you add some tactics to an already devastating unit, and indeed, that is 70%. Not quite 70, almost 70%. And it suddenly becomes a calamitous loss for the enemy, right? An incredible victory for our units. The guys all roar and cheer because you're the genius general, and you go get the prom queen. All right, so I'm actually going to do a little bit of practice hill for the kill box, just sort of configuring what I want to do. We're not actually going to have this as part of this episode. I've already fucking monologued you guys long enough. We're going to wrap this episode up. But what we're effectively going to be doing in these next couple, 3 episodes are doing much more advanced tactics, right? I'm just going to wrap this episode up as I sort of show you sort of a prelude to the kill box. The kill box is a strategy where you surround the enemy and you're shooting them on all sides. You're forming squares to be defensive when you need to be. And generally, again, you fuck the prom queen, right? It's a totally guaranteed success if you perform it correctly. So hopefully these tactics are gonna help you, friends. Hopefully you found this episode entertaining. Hopefully you're swearing more, at least not at church and at Thanksgiving with your grandma there. Hopefully you're having a lot more enjoyment and fun with Bannerlord as you start to put more and more tactics into your basket of tricks. You start to integrate these into your own tricks, and generally that will, I think, improve both your satisfaction and fun in Bannerlord, which are very much lacking in today's society, right? We don't get a lot of that. A lot of people have just kind of mundane, boring jobs. The fire service all across the country is hiring fellas. I've said that a lot lately, but if you want a good profession, go be a firefighter. Of course, you definitely want to hit like. I'm a firefighter, right? We're good friends here. We're helping you guys out. and I appreciate you fellas. So hit subscribe, of course, if you want to see more from our channel. I post pretty regular content. In fact, some people are overwhelmed by how much content we push out there. I love Bannerlord. I'm very passionate about Bannerlord. I'm a student of military history, tactics, warfare. I'm kind of an obsessive compulsive person in that regard. So I appreciate you fellas again. Thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, I'm going to shut the fuck up now. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll talk to you next time.